In the words of Big News Morgan himself, right? We got big news, everybody. And I mean big news, alright? Like, literally, let's put it this way, alright? It is literally a queen-sized big, alright? And speaking of queen, that's who we're discussing here, alright? How funny is that? So yes, the biggest information that I'm going to be discussing is with Queen's most recent Vivre Card that was basically been released, right? As we got more information on Queen's backstory, that sort of gives us a potential hint on who could actually be related to Queen. Now, some people have actually suggested another character, and I'm going to go over both of these characters and sort of give my opinion on which one I think makes most sense, but how both of them could actually fit into the scenario, okay? So what exactly is this that everyone is basically talking about, all right? What exactly is it that this is basically being discussed about Queen, okay? Well, the most recent Vivre Card packs have basically come out, and we sort of got a bit of a timeline on Queen's past, and we sort of get an idea of, like, where, how everything went down inside that during his past, right? Especially during the time when he was in Mads, and, when he eventually came to, like, join Kaido or the Beast Pirates, okay? Well, here's basically a timeline, all right? So, for one thing to put out there, that Queen's real name is actually Cyan, all right? Which is actually short for scientist, okay? Or science in that general, okay? So, Queen's real name is actually Cyan, okay? And here's basically a timeline on Queen's past before we even really get to know him, before we even get introduced to him, okay? And here's what we have to look at, okay? So, 39 years ago, worked in Mads, okay? So, Mads is basically this scientist, group that was basically together with Vegapunk, Judge, who is, Sanji's father, you also had Caesar, these scientists were basically in a group and stuff like that during the time in Mads, like a long time ago, okay? 36 years ago, had a child, okay? 33 years ago, gets an offer from Kaido to join him, okay? 29 years ago, leaves Mads. 26 years ago, Mads is bought by the world government. And during that same year, 26 years ago, Queen abandons his son, joins Kaido under the name of Queen, alright? Now, the main person that everyone is sort of pointing to on who this could actually be representing is actually Franky, okay? Yes, the same Franky who is the shipwright of the Straw Hat Pirates, right? The same one who built the Sunny for the Straw Hat Pirates. Particularly the same one who built the Sunny in order to help Luffy sail the world so he can get to the end of the, get to Loudtail, find One Piece, and become king of the pirates in order to attain his dream, okay? Yes, that's Franky himself, okay? And why does everyone think this, okay? Well, it's mostly focused on the 36 years and the 26 years, okay? 36 years ago, he had a child, okay? Oddly enough, Franky was born 36 years ago, right? He is 36 years old right now in the current story. 26 years ago, abandons his son, joins Kaido under the name of Queen, alright? Oddly enough, Franky was abandoned nearly 26 years ago, alright? When he was 10 years old, alright? He was abandoned by a parent of his, okay? At the time, when this was basically revealed, we didn't know if it was like both of his parents or one of his parents, but it was basically stated that he was abandoned by a parent, okay? And Franky even mentioned that, like, during the time it's like that when we got basically a bit of a flashback and all that kind of stuff, like Oden's flashback, Franky even basically stated that, no, he has no reason to, no need to be a pirate like that. His father abandoned him, his mother abandoned him, or whatever the scenario might be, things like that, and basically stated that they went off to be a pirate, okay? Which kind of fits in the scenario here, right? Queen, during his time in Mads, wasn't really a pirate, okay? However, in this scenario, this kind of fits with the whole Queen and Franky logic, because Queen, after leaving Mads, basically went off to become a pirate, basically joined the Beast Pirates, okay? And oddly enough, 26 years ago would align perfectly when Franky was actually abandoned by his parent as well. So the scenarios added up in a bit of a timeline, okay? Let's go over other evidence and understand why we can typically see more evidence, right? What can other things foreshadow, right? Here's something. In Volume 39 and Volume 93, oddly enough, both Franky and Queen are basically doing a very similar pose, right? Sure, their poses are just like a slightly different, right? But they're both in the background of the main panel, basically doing the same pose, okay? Sure, like I said, their poses do have their own unique styles like that, but it's kind of a similar pose, okay? Not to mention 39 and 93, right? Literally, if you flip 39 around, you get 93, okay? both in some weird way can be described as pervy dancers, right? Like literally both of them can be described as perverts in some way. And now you really have to ask yourself, right? Like we know Franky does have like his own unique traits and like that, like his own unique moves and styles like that. But we have to really ask ourselves, right? We have to really ask ourselves, right? Does Franky got the moves of his father, right? If he's literally the son of Queen, does he have the moves of Queen, all right? Like seriously, right? I will admit, all right, Queen is a jerk and stuff like that. I'm glad that Sanji kicked his butt and stuff like that. I am thankful that and I am glad for it. But one thing I will definitely defend on Queen, all right, is that he is someone who knows how to dance and party, all right? He knows how to bring the moves, all right? Zuma, 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 funk! All right, come on. You cannot tell me, yes, Queen is a jerk, right? He's literally, I am glad that Sanji kicked his butt, all right? But I will defend him in that he is the best funk mastering dancer in the One Piece world, all right? He knows how to dance it. But we're not done. I got more. Another thing to actually look at is actually with Queen's Delphoid, right? So Queen has a Delphoid, a zone type, that basically transforms him into a Brachiosaurus, right? What's the connection with Franky on this? Well, Franky, oddly enough, actually built something called the Brachio Tank, alright? Both are intelligent with engineering capabilities, alright? So think of it this way, right? Both of them are extremely intelligent and have basically shown to basically engineer different things, including themselves, all right? Both of them have basically been described, and both of them can even be described as a cyborg, all right? Franky remodeled himself, right, into a cyborg. Same thing with Queen, right? Queen completely cheated the death system, right, by remodeling his body, right, into a cyborg, okay? Which is insane when you think about it, alright? It was literally freaky when you see what he basically did to his own body, especially when he's in his Brachio hybrid form, okay? Now, Franky, on the other hand, his situation in becoming a cyborg is a bit different than Queen's, okay? Their scenarios and why they became cyborgs and their whole ambitions and their whole reasonings are like very different, okay? So, to get an understanding on how Franky sort of became a cyborg, how this all turned out, okay? So, Franky, who was abandoned nearly 26 years ago at the age of 10, okay? He basically grew up on Water 7, all right? And during his time, he was under the tutelage of Tom, okay? Tom was basically the shipwright who actually helped build a ship, the Oro Jackson, for Gold Roger back in the day, okay? And you see, Tom actually had like a goal or dream of his that he wanted to accomplish, right? Particularly a sea train that can travel on the sea, okay? Now, Tom was supposed to be executed for help building the ship of the Pirate King, okay? However, he was basically given a temporary pardon to allow him to finish the actual train, okay? And then once the train was finished, Tom was basically to be escorted off to, be executed, okay? And Franky, who basically was under the tutelage of Tom, the one who he probably considers his real father, okay? And that's definitely true, right? And in any scenario, it is barely obvious that Franky, if anyone's going to ask Franky, like, hey, Franky, who would you say feels more like a father to you, right? He's going to say Tom regardless of the situation, right? It's probably no more different than how Nami is with Ginzo or even Bellamy, or how like, if someone asks her, who do you really consider a father figure, right? And Nami's probably going to say Ginzo. It's the same scenario, okay? And the thing about this is that with Franky, when Tom is basically being taken off like that, Franky actually tries to actually stop the train, okay? However, he doesn't, okay? And then afterwards, when Franky is basically drifting out in the ocean, he basically stumbles upon a ship, okay? An abandoned ship that is floating in the midst of nowhere. And as he gets on the ship, he basically takes like a whole bunch of like a scrap metals like that. Like this ship has like a whole bunch of like abandoned technologies and stuff like that. It doesn't seem to be your typical like wooden pirate ship and stuff like that. Like this ship is like a complete mystery, right? Like it didn't seem to be a government ship. It didn't seem to be like a pirate ship. Like no one knew what the ship was at the time, okay? Franky takes parts from the ship and completely remodels himself, okay? Which is insane that he was able to do that, okay? Which shows that, you could even argue in the sense that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree in this sense, okay? Now, here's one thing about the ship, okay? That some people have even suggested and theorized that the ship that Franky finds in his flashback, the same ship, is potentially the Mad ship, okay? So in one of the the cover stories during the let's see, it was during the Germa's Duel 6 and stuff like that, and during like the Mad's backstory and stuff like that, we basically see this Mad ship, okay? And oddly enough, people have actually pointed out that it looks almost very similar to the same ship that Franky found in his flashback, right? Which, oddly enough, would be a pretty funny way to tie things in, okay? Here's the last thing to really go over on Franky and Queen necessarily, right? And I'll go over like the second person essence, and I'll sort of give my reasonings on everything, okay? So another interesting thing is actually go over blood types, okay? So Oda hasn't really given us any concrete information on blood types, right? Or in general, like how the blood system would actually work in the One Piece world. Like, does it work the same in our world compared to that world? We don't necessarily know, okay? However, there is one thing to actually look at, okay? So with a lot of family members, or at least the ones that have been officially confirmed, some of them do tend to have the same blood type. Now, I don't really have the time to list every single family member, so I'm only going to go over the ones who I think have a very significant, well, not really significant matter in the story, but the ones I think can really set the groundwork for what I'm establishing here, okay? So, Luffy, Dragon, and Garp, okay? All have blood type F. Ace and Roger, blood type S. Usopp and Yasopp, blood type S. Sanji and Iji, Yonji, and Ichi both have blood type S. I mean, all have blood type S, which is the RH equivalent. So, and then you have Judge, who is blood type S. Now, one thing to actually mention here is that Reiju actually has the same blood type as her mom, okay? So, Reiju and Sora blood types are different from the boys and Judge, okay? And that's actually something I should actually mention. I should have actually mentioned this before I did the blood types, but with the blood types, these are the blood types that are basically been confirmed within the One Piece world, right? So, you have F, S, X, XF, and RH. Now, RH is an equivalent of the S blood type, okay? Franky and Queen both have a blood type of XF, okay? Now, going over it, logically speaking, everything that has basically been laid down, or everything that has basically been stated to us, does seem to make sense why we can consider Franky to be the child of Queen. Now, should we actually take this as absolute 100% true? No, we should not, okay? We should definitely keep in mind here is that Oda can always pull a fast one, right? On us, okay? There can always be a situation that Oda will bring up that will completely blow our minds, and it's like, we did not expect to see that, alright? But there is reasons on why people have the rights to believe it, and why it definitely does make sense, okay? Now, there are other reasons to go over, and I'll go over them as well, okay? So, before I really get into the whole reasons on why I think Franky is, or like why this other person might not be, or how it can actually fit, let's go over this other character that people are actually theorizing could actually be the actual son of Queen and not Franky, okay? And this other person, oddly enough, is Weevil himself, the self-proclaimed son of Whitebeard, alright? Now, why is this, okay? So, the first thing that most people are actually pointing to is that Weevil is 35, right? He was actually born 35 years ago, okay? Which, I mean, oddly enough, Oda did state that 36 years ago, Queen had a child, okay? Or at least in the Vivre Card, it states that 36 years ago, he had a child. And typically speaking, Oda has like retconned ages and heights and stuff like that before, so it really wouldn't be that hard to actually retcon Weevil's actual birthday from 35 to 36, so that could easily be fixed, right? That's probably not that far off. But let's actually go over some typical like connections that people are basically pointing out that one might actually see is like, okay, I can see your logic. I see where you're pointing at. All right, very good, right? Yeah, you know, you're cooking a fine, good meal, right? But you know, just because you can cook doesn't mean the meal is actually going to be good, right? So you're cooking pretty good, but let's see how the meal tastes. So Queen and Weevil connections, all right? There's probably more, but I'm only going to focus on some minor details in my sense, okay? So both have a similar body build, all right? So I mean, when you look at them like that, you can definitely see a very similar body build, okay? However, we can't really take this in consideration, okay? Body builds aren't necessarily, like, always a genetic thing, right? Like, I mean, sure, in some scenarios, there are times where, like, you might have, like, a family of large people or want to be large, but that's not technically genetically true in a sense, okay? Like, even when you're looking at Luffy and his father or Garp and stuff like that, like Luffy definitely didn't inherit like his father or his grandfather's like a body build, okay? Like he might have inherited his actual body physique from his mom, okay? So that's not really something we can specifically theorize or suggest because of it, okay? But I mean, heck, it's probably something to consider. Now, probably the biggest thing to really go over is actually Miss Bucking, all right? So Miss Bucking is the mother of Weevil, right? Or at least that's what we're led to believe, right? And that's what we have to actually believe. And that she is basically the self-proclaimed lover of Whitebeard, who basically, you know, got down and busy with Whitebeard and eventually gave birth to Weevil, right? Like seriously, you look at it and you probably have to question it, like, why? And then when you see the Rock's flashback, when you see Miss Bucking during her past, and it's like, you think back, it's like, okay, now I see why he got down with it. Now I see why she got busy. Okay, makes sense. So, Miss Bucking knew Queen during the time in Mads, alright? So when Queen was actually in Mads, Miss Bucking was actually in Mads as a freeloader during the time, okay? Alright, let's get back to business, alright? So, I apologize for the wait. I had to stop for a minute. But let's actually get back into it, okay? So, let's see. Okay, so I was basically sort of going over, like, Queen's, or not Queen's, but, well, yeah, Queen's backstory with Mads and like that, and basically going over the whole connection with Miss Bucking, okay? So, Miss Bucking, who was basically a freeloader at the time during the time of Mads, okay? Now, some people were actually sort of theorizing that this could actually more or less explain why it can actually be Weevil in that sense, okay? Because since Queen was actually working for Mads and actually with Mads during like a portion of the time, they actually think there's more reason to actually believe that it's actually believe that it's actually Queen who is like the actual father, and not Whitebeard in that sense. And another interesting connection here that some people are even theorizing and sort of like believing on why they are going to be related is because of Green Bull, right? And the fact that both of them were actually defeated by Green Bull, and actually taken into custody, right? Now, there is something that we do have to take into consideration, something that is actually very important to actually ask ourselves, okay? So, in chapter 1072, all right, when Marco actually returns to Sphinx Island, all right, the home of Whitebeard, all right, we actually find out that Weevil was actually captured by Green Bull for protecting Whitebeard's homeland, all right? For actually protecting the homeland, all right? He was actually captured and sent to impel down, okay? And when Marco basically returns, you know, Miss Bucking is still doing her whole typical, you know, like crying for her son, but she's also like doing the whole typical and like that. Oh, while you're at it, hand over Whitebeard's fortune, all right? And in the chapter, we get a moment where Miss Bucking basically states to Marco, "Oh, Marco, I can hear that that sass in your mouth and stuff like that. I can hear that sass from you, right? You don't believe that Weevil is really the son of Whitebeard, right? In some cases, in some texts, it basically states that you don't believe Weevil and Whitebeard are really related, do you? Well, I know someone who can prove it, and that is Vegapunk himself, right? And literally, that's actually something to take in consideration here, right? Something that is very heavily important that many people are actually skipping over, all right? If Miss Bucking is willing to actually basically make a bet or basically make a deal in a sense and basically state that if you don't believe me, all right, then go ask Vegapunk, all right? He can confirm it. Who I should remind everyone in the One Piece world has basically been described as the genius amongst geniuses of his time, or probably any time in that sense. Even though when we finally get introduced to Vegapunk, we understand that there are some things that he himself couldn't even figure out. But he is a genius amongst the geniuses that we have basically been shown. Alright? And the fact that Miss Bucking is even willing to actually suggest this, or even make the deal, or basically make the, basically make this claim and tell Marco, if you don't believe me, just go ask Vegapunk, right? He can confirm it. Which, you think about that, that seems like a pretty dumb thing to say, right? Because you have to look at this on both ends of the angle, right? If Marco does go, then and ask Vegapunk, right? If he does manage to meet Vegapunk, whatever Vegapunk it is, and then basically confirms 100% that Weevil is the son of Whitebeard, then truth be told. But then you have the other scenario that if Marco goes, and then Weevil is not Whitebeard's son, then that just basically shows that Miss Bucking is a liar. Which you oddly have to think and ask yourself is like, why would we even need the whole scenario of a liar to begin with, alright? Like, that wouldn't make any sense. Most of, like, when it comes to, like, Weevil, or, like, how Oda is typically writing the character Weevil for the audience, like, it's basically to the point where we, the readers, are the same in the characters in the One Piece world, right? The same as the citizens and the whole One Piece character, right? Just like with us and them, we are basically all thinking the same thing. Like, is Weevil really the son of Whitebeard? Is Weevil really the son of Miss Bucking? Is Weevil even really a Weevil to begin with? Like, we're all asking the same questions and all wanting the same answer. And typically speaking, that is something to really ask herself, right? And why would she even make this suggestion to actually go say that, hey, just go ask Vegapunk if you don't believe me? Which it seems like a really dumb idea, because it's like you're literally pointing someone into the right direction to actually prove yourself wrong. Unless there's actually something more to it that even Miss Bucking herself doesn't ever really realize, or never even realized to begin with. Alright. So, before I really get into the whole situation more, let's actually jump back to the whole Franky situation, alright? Let's actually go over something on Franky. So, one thing to actually look at is basically with the timelines, right? So, with Franky, it does seem to actually have more weight to understand like why this could be Franky, especially when he had a child and when he abandoned the child, right? However, some people basically argued and questioned, well, why doesn't Franky remember anyone from Mads? Like, why doesn't he remember Mads? Why doesn't Franky actually remember Caesar, Judge, or even Vegapunk in that sense, alright? Well, nothing was ever officially given on anything that Franky ever went to, like, the Mads and ever was actually part of it, alright? Even during the cover stories, okay? And you typically have to ask yourself, even when looking at, like, the past, like, the whole backstory with Mads and stuff like that, like, literally, you look at it, does Queen really look like the type of person that would even, well, actually, you know what, he probably is the kind of person who would bring his child to work. But look, the point is that I don't think we could typically state that this is obvious because of that, because Franky was in the right age, right? Like, I mean, heck, like, I mean, in some scenarios, some kids have been to works with their parents, but some kids in their lifetime have actually never probably been to their parents' work, okay? I mean, I've been to my mom's work before, back when she worked at Vet Labs, but, I mean, it's not like I went there all the time to necessarily remember every person who worked there. I mean, like, I don't even think I even remember if I ever met the person who was actually in charge, like the actual manager of the place. I mean, I probably have, but it's just something that this doesn't really fit my my brain to remember that, okay? Like, whenever I went to my mom's work during the time when she worked at Vet Labs, like, when me and my sister went there, like, the main rooms that we mostly went to was basically, we just stayed in, like, the cafeteria room, and, you know, I would basically draw or, like, do a coloring book, things like that. Like, we do something to pass the time. And then the other rooms that we would basically go to is actually, like, this huge room. I think it's where, like, they brought, like, trucks or stuff like that, and they actually had a giant basketball goal there, okay? They had, like, this big, huge basketball goal. And me and my sister, we would actually play basketball in the room and stuff like that, okay? And, I mean, the other thing that we would do sometimes is that we would actually help break boxes down and stuff like that, but we weren't typically allowed to actually go in the back room where they handled all the chemicals and stuff like that. I mean, we've been back there on a few occasions in order to get mom and stuff like that because of something, but typically speaking, we weren't really back there all the time, and we weren't really, you know, we didn't really get interaction with most of the workers there. So, in reality, in that sense, like, I can understand potentially why Franky might not actually remember it, or even why Franky might not even really, right, Franky probably wouldn't even really have any interest, okay? Like, he probably doesn't even really care about his father and never really have anything to do with him, and he probably thinks that, you know, the people that his father hangs out with, he probably just doesn't really consider or even thinks that there's someone worthy of his time, okay? Now, one thing to really go over here is the timeline that I actually think could actually make sense, alright? And I'll actually go over for both of them, alright? So, let's actually explain something on the Weevil part that I think really has to take into consideration, okay? And it's basically with this, okay? So, while we can definitely suggest that the whole 36 years ago, 35 years for Franky or Weevil could easily be fixed, okay? That could easily be fixed. But this is actually something where it's actually very questionable on how Weevil can actually fit in this, right? Even if you want to state that Miss Bucking does have a connection with Maz, same thing as Queen, which could definitely fit that scenario, but there is something that logically does not make any sense, okay? And that is this, right? So, 29 years ago, Queen leaves Maz, okay? 3 years later, typically 26 years ago, Queen abandons his son, alright? Now, think about that very carefully, right? when we're introduced to the whole Weevil and misbucking, the whole ordeal, right, the whole situation that is introduced to us, that is implying, is that they're trying to basically get Whitebeard's treasure, right? Right, and that, you know, Weevil, that we're led to believe, is in fact the actual son of Whitebeard, even though we were actually questioning it ourselves. The same thing with the One Piece community and One Piece characters in their world. Okay, we're all questioning it. It's typically this that I actually kind of question why some people are not even thinking about this. Okay, so if that's logically speaking, right, when Queen leaves Mads 29 years ago, right, and it's 3 more years before he eventually bans his son, no matter if it's Franky or even Weevil, that would have to imply that both of them had spent time with Queen during that 3 years, okay? And you have to ask yourself, right? Why would Miss Bucking, who is or might or might not be the actual son of Weevil, or mother of Weevil, should I typically say, why would they stay with Queen for 3 years? Queen leaves Mads 29 years ago. 3 years later, Queen abandons his son to join Kaido, okay? And keep in mind, Weevil has never really given an indication on anything of being abandoned in a sense, okay? Right? I mean, by all matters, Edward probably never even thought that he had a son, right? He probably did get down and busy with Miss Bucking, but he probably left before he even realized that Miss Bucking was pregnant, right? He probably didn't even really know, right? So maybe that's actually something, which could technically be possible, right? I mean, there have been times where people have actually gotten down in business like that and gotten, like, you know, the woman that they're engaged with, like, you know, sleeping with, you know, they have gotten pregnant like that and they gave birth like that. But there have been times like things like this can actually occur and happen, okay? And it's literally that I actually have to ask, like, well, how would that actually fit? Like, how would that actually fit? Like, yes, the whole Mads connection is one thing, right? That's actually a good point. The whole scenario where the age of them can easily be fixed. But it's that 3-year gap that is completely missing the point. And if that's the case, then it would make more sense, logically speaking, to actually state that Queen abandoned his son when he left Mads. Like, the whole 3 years later, abandons his son, joins Kaido under the name Queen. Like, 26 years ago, wouldn't make any sense. Like, if that's the case, then just say that he abandoned his son when he left Mads. Like, that wouldn't make any sense. It really wouldn't. Because then you're having to imply that Weevil was living with Queen for nearly 3 years, or nearly most of his entire life, before he actually went off to join Kaido of the Beast Pirates. So, here's what I actually think how a story can actually fit, and I'll actually point something that might actually work in Weevil's favor as well. All right, I'll put down something for both of them. Okay, so here's a bit of a timeline that I'm going to lay down. Okay, so let's start off with Franky, all right, and then I'll do Weevil. Okay, so here's I actually think how it is. Okay, so Franky was born 36 years ago. Okay, 36 years ago he was born. Right. However, during this time, this is where I think it's actually interesting. Right, so between a year he was born, from 29 years ago, Franky was actually living with his mom, right? Franky was actually living with his mom, right? His mom basically had an affair, had something to do with led with Queen, and Queen eventually got a woman knocked up and pregnant, right? And Franky mostly was living with his mother at the time, depending on where the house is or wherever he lived, okay? And 29 years ago, Queen leaves Mads, right? Queen leaves Mads because he is forced to have to take care of his son, right? A son that he probably doesn't even want or even really care about, okay? And the same thing could be said about Franky, right? Franky probably has, like, no interest in his father and doesn't really believe he's anything important at all, something that he doesn't really care about, okay? And for nearly 3 years, Queen was forced to take care of his son. Eventually, he decides that, you know, this isn't worth it. I don't want this anymore. I give up, right? And decides to abandon Franky in the middle of nowhere, and basically goes off to join Kaido, takes him up on his offer that Kaido offered him a couple years back, okay? Which I think makes the perfect sense in that scenario, okay? Now, some people are even questioning, well, why doesn't Franky remember anyone claims, okay? Like in Mads, like that. Well, there are 2 scenarios where you can look at, or at least a couple. Number one, it could be possible that Franky does remember Queen. It's just that, depending on the scenario, how you look at it, you have to look at this from, like, Oda's writing style, and the actual context of the story and the characters themselves, okay? So it could be argued that Franky does remember, like, Queen is his father, but going over it and everything that we have to actually ask ourselves and question, Like, even if that's the case, like, Franky would actually have no reason to even care about who his real father is, right? He knows that his father is actually a jerk who abandoned him in the middle of, like, nowhere, well, not in the middle of nowhere, right? But just abandoned him and literally just left, all right? So even if, like, his father, or if he ran into his father and say that, he'd have, like, no reason to even give, like a question to actually basically talk amongst ourselves, or even talk in the sense of, like, just saying, like, hey everyone, did you guys know that guy back there was my father? Or, like, imagine a scenario when the Striats are basically leaving Waddles like that, and Franky basically tells Sanji, hey Sanji, just to let you know, good job on kicking that Queen guy's butt, alright? I wish I could have done it myself. Yeah, you really showed my old man a thing or two. I appreciate it. Wait, that was your old man? It's like, and even us the readers will be, wait, hold on, what? You're telling me that the guy that Sanji beat the crap out of was your father? Totally left field scenario here that totally gets brought up. And it really wouldn't have to actually fit the context of the story, right? Like, there are certain characters in the One Piece world, even with the Straw Hats, where you actually have to actually think about them, like, where we basically get introduced, where we actually have to question and ask ourselves, like, do we have any real reason to basically consider anything, okay? Like, we know for a fact that Franky was abandoned and his parents went out to become pirates, okay? We know that for a fact, okay? And even if we did run into them, it makes perfect sense on why this could actually be typically Queen, right? Queen does fit that scenario where he definitely does seem like the kind of person who would abandon his own child, and the sense of, like, you can describe him as a jerk, and even if Franky does recognize him, like, he'd have no reason to even talk about it, right? Like it's any scenario with any person in our world like that who have, like, bad implications with, like, their family members, okay? Like, even if they did like run into them again, like, during the time, like, they have no reason to actually talk about it, right? They have, like, no reason to even want to bring them up in the first place, right? That's just the way it is. Now, here's how a Weevil scenario can actually fit, okay? So, like I said, the whole 35, 36 years ago could easily be a retcon, okay? That could easily be a retcon, okay? But like I said, it's the whole 3 years between the 29 to 26 years ago that sort of leaves something very questionable, okay? So here's what I think could actually work, okay? So, with the whole scenario that Miss Bucking basically told Marco, if you don't believe that Whitebeard and Weevil are actually related, go ask Vegapunk, right? Here's what I actually think could actually occur. So, Miss Bucking actually made a deal with Vegapunk, okay? That would allow them to actually use her to actually form a successful clone of Mad's creation, alright? Which basically led to Stussy herself, okay? Miss Bucking made a deal, alright? That if you can actually help me father the child of Whitebeard, I will actually take in consideration, alright? Vegapunk agrees. Vegapunk, through probably some means, wasn't able to get actual DNA of Whitebeard himself, right? Or maybe he was, but maybe there was a bit of, like, extra DNA thrown in there as well, as some people actually suggested, okay? But let's just stick to one scenario at a time, okay? And basically, Vegapunk wasn't able to get any DNA lineage from Whitebeard, okay? Instead, he borrows it from Queen, okay? Now, whether or not Queen actually knew is hard to say. I mean, I guess you could easily state that Queen probably did know and probably just went along with it just for the scenario on, like, what exactly would Queen get out of it. So, let's just say for the sake of the argument that Queen does give his DNA, or basically some of his lineage, to Vegapunk in order to help Miss Bucking have Whitebeard's child, okay? Miss Bucking is basically led to believe that Weevil is the son of Whitebeard, right? And she actually believes it. Not realizing that this whole entire time that Weevil is actually DNA'd from actual Queen himself, okay? And even with the whole situation of, like, Weevil being born and Miss Bucking's connection with Mads, nothing, like, we don't even know when Miss Bucking actually left Mads, okay? We don't actually know, like, the full context of, like, how long she was in Mads in any situation like that, right? We know she was a freeloader during that time in Mads, but we don't know the full context of it, okay? And even when looking at the Mads history, it really doesn't add up how Miss Bucking and Weevil can actually fit into that scenario with Queen, especially when Queen's left Mads 29 years ago, and for 3 years before he eventually bans his son to join Kaido, that would have to imply that Queen and Weevil spent some time together, okay? Like, even during that time, like, there would be no reason to even say that he abandoned his son, because you'd have to, like, really, you really have to give the evidence, or really the statement, that Queen was very fond of his son, that he was actually there for his son. But looking at it, and who Queen is, and everything we're introduced to, he doesn't seem like the kind of person who would like hang out with any of his sons, if he had any of them, whether or not it be Franky or Weevil. I don't think it logically makes any sense. So I think that's actually how it could actually play out. Okay, to me, I think that's where it actually goes. Which, oddly enough, would actually make Franky and Weevil half brothers in a sense, or kind of related. And oddly enough, if Franky is the actual son of Queen, that would make two genetically modified humans in different scenarios who are actually the child of someone who worked in maths, right? Sanji with Judge, and Franky with Queen, okay? So that's literally everything to go over with the whole connection with Franky, Queen, and Weevil, right? The whole scenario, the whole foretell, the whole ordeal, whatever we're going to accomplish, right? Whatever we're going to discuss. That's everything to go over, okay? Now, like I said, I don't think it typically matters, right? If Franky knew Queen, or even if he forgot, right? Even if he doesn't remember, okay? Logically speaking, we know for a fact that Franky obviously doesn't have very good connections with his father, right? In a sense, like, he probably doesn't even care. And even if he remembers Queen and knew that Queen was his father during the Onigashima raid, during the fights of, like, Onigashima, I don't think it typically matters that Franky didn't necessarily bring it up or didn't even talk about it, okay? It would even make sense with the context of the story, and it would even logically make sense for a narrative point of the character. Like think about it. Like, when you're randomly, like, going around and like that, like, when you're someone who actually has like a bad history with, like, your parents like that, or your father or mother, whatever the scenario may be, and like that, do you always bring them up in conversation? And even if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, it's like, no, you wouldn't. All right. Now, to be very clear, I'm not trying to paint myself into a bad picture, all right? I'm not trying to actually paint anything with my dad, okay? My dad's actually a wonderful guy, all right? He's actually the best father I could ever have, it's like that, okay? And I'm glad to actually have him as my dad, okay? My dad's a really great person, all right? Like, I remember, like back in my times like that when I was growing up, I remember going to spend time with my dad. Like, when I first went to go with my dad's over my place like that, they lived, like, in a trailer park. I went over there, like, during a couple hours, spent time with him and my brothers like that, and we basically hung out and played together. And eventually, when my dad actually got, like, their own actual place, I was able to stay with them during the summer. And I remember some good times playing with them, like, hanging out. Like, during the times when I went there, like, we played, like, games together, we watched movies. Like, there were some, like good activities. And even though, like, when it comes to, like, me, my dad, or even my brothers, like, we all have, like, our different traits. Like, we all have, like, our different like, our different hobbies, our different things that actually set us apart, but we always had that one thing to actually, like, bond over, something to really get interested in, right? And same thing could even be said with Franky and Queen, like, how you can see how they can have both have a general hobby, in the sense of, like, you know, how they can have, like, a very good connection, but yet their personalities are, like, totally different. Like, they, like, you just look at them and say, like, these two have nothing in common, but it's like you look at this scenario and it's like, oh, these two people have totally something in common. It's crazy how that actually works, right? And like when I was going in with my dad and like that, and like playing there and like that, like playing with my brothers, we played like Mario Kart, Art 64, we played the Mario Party games, like whatever it may be, Monkey Ball, like we played, like we just had fun on playing it, right? We even played the Simpsons Clue back in the game, including with my stepmom, like that. It was a fun time. It was one of the best times of my life growing up, and just spending time with family members, spending time with my dad and like that. And so, not all can be said for every other person, especially with characters in the One Piece world, right? And Franky, obviously, he has no reasons or even reasons on why he has to talk about his father. It's no more different than anybody in our world who doesn't really want to talk about their past, their past, right? Even if they did run into their father again or their mother again, and they just basically want to just ignore it and move on, it's probably a very simple situation as that, okay? All right. So that will do it. That is the end of everything I want to accomplish, everything I want to discuss. My name is Cliff Ford. If you liked what I had to say, anything at all, if you feel like something needs to be thrown in that I forgot to mention, that was something important, please leave it down in the comment section below, all right? If you enjoyed my video, subscribe, hit the button, do whatever it needs to be to enjoy, do whatever you have to make yourselves happy, all right? Because if I feel like I can get you guys to be excited for my content and my video, will really show support, and it will help me increase my chances even further. So once again, thank you. You all have a great day. Bye now.